Hello again, and welcome back to the Power Podcast with me, Joe. Okay, I was really hoping that someone else would say something. Alex and Sam.
Hello. I'm sorry. Well, sorry, it just sort of cut out there. We're just waiting in anticipation. Just like, has he got something? Has he got something? No, no.
Fair enough.
Okay, it's down to us.
My internet has not been helpful in the past, so that is definitely yeah. Did he just cut out, or is he waiting for us? So no. This episode that has gone so well. I think at this point we're just almost a badge of honor is just terrible intros. So here we go.
Yeah, it's our thing.
Shape-shifting.
It's
our brand.
It's shapeshift into a semi-professional podcast.
So, shape-shifting. I went back and forth whether or not to do 2 separate episodes on this or just do one whole episode on this in general, because after speaking to the both of you on Discord, we kind of realized that, there's kind of a few different ways that shape-shifting goes about. In my usual experience, or at least some of the times that I think of it, my primary thought when thinking of shapeshifting is usually transmogrification in the form of you just transform into another being, almost as if you copy their looks, height, shape, and size. You'll turn into another person like Mystique, or you can turn into an object. But as Sam, you actually said, Prototype and Venom, who, when I actually had a look at it, it is probably the most purest form of biological shapeshifting instead of transformation or transmogrification shapeshifting. So these are the 2 separate components. There's transmogrification / transformation, which is pretty much you just turn into another thing, and then there's biological shapeshifting, or just I guess you could say body morphing, which is pretty much completely just being able to bend and meld and manipulate your body in all sorts of different ways. Many different characters have shown to do this. Even, in fact, other abilities that we have spoken about on the Power Podcast actually can do this. So we're actually going to take a look at different sort of things. The main thing that I wanted to talk about is the concept of how good either of them are. So I'll break it down and we'll talk about the 2 different ones. But the main thing I wanted to talk about is actually the first one, which is the transformation one. The ability to turn into either inanimate objects or organic living creatures. Either of these 2 powers are fairly famous in many different ways, not just Mystique, but with Beast Boy and so on and so forth. But I actually really wanted to just talk about this power for a second in the form of the purity of it. It's usually a person can turn their form and mimic perfectly, or roughly get the shape and size of the creature, as in they're human or they're whatever species, and then suddenly, poof, I'm a dog now, or bam, I'm a different looking person, or boosh, I'm a chair.
It's funny you say the last one, actually, because transforming into inanimate objects, I find with a lot of characters in popular culture, it's actually kind of rare. Everyone kind of goes for the conception is that it's a living thing. Like with Mystique, it's like living creatures usually, but not really inanimate objects like chair, or the only one I could really think of that just has inorganic shapeshifting is Turbo Teen, which is like a joke among people, because it's a guy that can transform into a car when he gets really hot, and that's weird. What are that's nobody's power fantasy. I don't think you think about I'm thinking about it in terms of this is a power fantasy, because people would love to just be mimics of people and things, just to either get away out of a situation or just become something completely different. But it's there is an element of wish fulfillment. It's oh, you could be this person, so you could trick people, or you can get to the highest echelon, so you could run as fast as a cheetah because you are a cheetah, and then you're there's no one going out there saying, I want to be a chair so people can sit on me. Well,
I
actually,
mean, there's probably other
yeah,
people
there's
out there
probably.
who would
I,
want
I
that.
take
Come on
that
now.
back. I take that back. You know what? That can be my argument completely null and void. They're probably
After
not.
seeing the internet blow up after just that teaser trailer from Resident Evil, and now obviously the Resident Evil game is now out. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who would want to be a sturdy enough chair for certain people to sit on them. So yeah, I'm 100% under that belief that that power is definitely for certain people.
Sam, you know when you said that invisibility was the ultimate pervert's power? I have a contender.
Thank you, Joe.
Join us next week where we talk about perverted powers.
Hey, that'll be fun.
No, it was joking.
You've opened the floodgates now.
You opened it up. I have so
Ironically-
many examples of this now.
Ironically, it would be probably the most
So
viewed
many examples.
The most viewed episode is just like, oh man, we got so many views, and it's just like so many people just like, yes, and what are they? How do I find them? Where perhaps could I? How would I search this power up by any chance?
Literally just.
I mean, there is a book called The Book of Erotic Fantasy for all those needs.
You talk about objects like, as you said, cars or chairs or people. Usually it's like relative to that thing, because sometimes you'll actually get it where they perfectly mimic the object, or it's like, oh, they're a chair, so their entire physiology is now wood, or a car, so therefore like they're made of metal and they have working parts and so on and so forth. Just kind of almost like they turn into an actual sentient form of that thing. But we also do see other forms where instead it's made to look like it, but it's still made out of like flesh, or at least it's made out of something that mimics steel, but still if it like got hit, maybe blood would come out of it because again, you were a living creature. So there's different ways that it works. I would call these like perfect/imperfect. Like imperfect would just be you're not turning purely into the thing. For instance, like imperfect form of like organic shapeshifting would be you turn into a person, but there are still some downsides to the factor of it. Like say for instance, like you want to turn into someone who's a different sex as you, or even different shape, size, voice, but you can only mimic their appearance, and I don't know, like the imperfect form, you can't change your vocal cords because you don't know how that works, or just because you look like them doesn't mean that you have the same physical capabilities or techniques that they may have. But perfect, I would say you have all of their physical, athletic capabilities and their vocal capabilities as well.
Actually, it's funny you should say that because there is a character in She-Ra called Double Trouble who is able to do that. Like, mimic them perfectly, and like the voice actors on the show have a great time whenever Double Trouble is speaking, because literally they lend all of their voices to when the character is mimicking them. But the thing about Double Trouble is that it's still not perfect in the sense like they're non-binary, first of all, like, so gender isn't a barrier at all. So the problem is that they kind of like have to study the people as well, because while they can mimic their voice and face perfectly, and essentially are those people for that time, they can't mimic their behaviors without analyzing them. Like, they have to be a good actor as well, and that's what tips people off. And I think that's partly what can let people with shape-shifting down, is that they are perfect, but then they just like go into a situation saying, "Hello, fellow friends. How are you on this day? Do you have top secret plans?"
It is the whole thing of, yes, it is the Stephen Buscemi "Hello, my fellow kids" thing. It is that whole thing of, yes, you could look like a duck, talk like a duck, smell like a duck, but if you suddenly start like jotting down notes on a pen and pad, people are going to start wondering if you are truly a duck. Or at least they're not going to think that you're a normal duck.
I mean, I actually have a good example of that where they wouldn't know immediately.
Oh,
From the classic series Red Dwarf, the polymorph.
Oh yes,
Which, because it is, if I remember correctly, it is somewhat telepathic, and it more or less changes form to elicit an emotional response to then drain that emotion from you.
Oh,
As a way to feed it. So, like, like it will turn into something scary, and it'll drain your fear. What like one of the like, in the book, one of the books transformed in like a really weakened one, transformed into David Lister. He's the David Lister that Crichton thought would look like, and acted perfectly like him. The point that Crichton didn't actually even know that it wasn't David Lister until until someone called him and told him, yeah, he's like 50 years older now. He's got grey hair. He shouldn't look like he's 20 anymore. But yeah, they can actually become anything as long as they can like read it telepathically from someone else's mind. They even do that. Like, they even do that like a somewhat funny one in one of the episodes. Like, I think it's either polymorph or a siren. They can also become objects, but like sausages and pants, which is one.
Oh yeah, it's like it literally gets onto Lister and it starts contracting. And his pads to cut him in half because he's put on the polymorph pad. That's a terrible kill. Like that, if that succeeded, that would be the worst kind of kill, just being cut in half.
Don't forget the mother when he turns into like Rimmer's mother. Just to like with her voice as well, and like the things this boy can do with alphabeti spaghetti.
Anyway,
the best line of that episode.
It's getting back to perverted podcast.
Moving on. So the most important part that I want to sort of explore, and Sam, you actually put it in a really quite odd but well enough way. When they can mimic it, it's what they can do. Because I would also state that like perfect form and imperfect form both have design flaws. For instance, imperfect form, we already know it's imperfect. It's not fully all the way there, transformation. There might be some issues. You can't fully mimic it. For instance, we've seen it with characters like Mystique, who she can't actually completely turn her claws into adamantium when she tries to mimic what's his name? Wolverine. But there are other ones as well. For instance, like as you just said there, Sam, with the pants, that you turn into pants and then you can start constricting, because imperfect forms would allow you to turn into these objects, but then also still control how they operate, how they are. Perfect, like you might only just be able to just turn into an object and that's it. Like you're perfectly that object, but that object cannot move on its own. Obviously, though, that would really differ. Because if you were able to have personal control whilst being a perfect chair, and the chair just starts running away, but like if you hit it, it still feels like you're hitting wood. Like you can't bend the legs, because they are made of wood. Well, unless of course if you're strong enough to bend wood. But you know what I mean. Like, whereas like it's just like a normal leg. If I break this leg, this guy's leg is going to be broken and it's going to snap like bone and flesh.
Oh, that's actually what, because that would be like a double-edged thing. Because like if you set it on fire, it'd be like setting a human on fire. It'll hurt for a bit, but it's not like setting wood on fire because you'll go up like a fucking candle.
And there are so many shows and so many pieces of fiction that show us these different operations. Like as we said last episode, we talked about like weapon physiology. And that's exactly it. Like, you turn into an object / a weapon, and it's like, this person acts and, is because they are just this object. They are just this weapon. Whereas, like, instead of, like, their body is shaping into and therefore mimicking the capabilities of this object. As I said, the car that suddenly starts bleeding because someone, like, tries to run their keys down the side of it or something.
That's it. If you just sort of actually that would be a nightmare. Just thinking about it is like kind of an existential nightmare, because if you're not like a car, you are a human shaped like a car. What if someone like turns the key in your car? Does that mean that they're like sticking it in like some kind of orifice or like
is it the same equivalent of like for instance like if you actually have a biological key hole in your car form. I don't want to know what that is. But if you have a key already in your ignition in your biological car form, that could just genuinely be something that you cannot remove, or at least you shouldn't want to. It could be the
If
equivalent
you turn it
of
off,
fingernails
that
or
kill
something.
you.
Oh no, that was just so awful. It's like if someone like turns you out and then rips you out, and it's just like and it just turns into a finger, and you're like, what?
But I think Sam's right. Like, would it like if that worked, would it kill you? It really depends on
You
those
turned it
situations.
off. You just power down.
And
Like the engine stops.
sleep, and the engine
heart just
stops,
stops.
and it's just the equivalent of your heart stopping. It really depends, because obviously there's a ton of different nightmarish possibilities, but in a lot of them, they just show us you can turn into this or you can turn into that. That's it. And obviously we're sort of like talking about this now. That'd be nightmarish if if we turn you off, you basically die, and the only way to restart your heart is by restarting your engine. Or just straight up, if we stop the car, it's the Sproink conundrum. You just die.
Oh jeez. I mean, you got to get the law clear with this, because before you even have this power, because I'm sorry, I didn't realize, because I thought, haha, Turbo Teen, very funny, but now it's like, wow, there's actually a lot of dark possibilities of like what exactly is transforming
Now,
and
obviously, you
that's
could
gonna
just have it
keep it
that
true.
it's just transmogrification, instead of like anything else. Like, oh, I am literally becoming this. It's like my body suddenly is able to turn into this, and I feel everything, but I feel what it's like to be a car with a nervous system. That's it. I can start myself up. Someone can turn off the ignition, but I can start myself up again. It doesn't mean that I'm dying, but if the car is destroyed, then either my body will be starting to break, or I will be forced out of my transformation, depending on what kind of way that you want to go about it. Because obviously some fictional universes will just have it, when the car is broken, the person is broken. But some might say instead, when the car is broken, the person is forced out of their transformation, and they're fine, other than they won't be able to turn back into it for a while. Obviously, if it was something like Invincible, it's like, I turn into a car. Car has its fucking door, like, ripped off. Guy de-transforms, missing, like, half of his body. And, like, just a nightmare. Now, they don't have anything like that in Invincible, but, like, they do go that whole thing of, like, no, there is no, like, easy escape out of this situation. Just because that you turn back or something.
Yeah.
I'd have to say though, organic shapeshifting is cool, but I think we've already talked about this once, where it's like with way back, if anyone remembers this, Alfie was saying about like, oh, what would be really cool is if you turned into something, and we were obviously saying about like, oh well, if there was a curse where anything that you turned into, any person that you turned into, everyone recognizes you as that person. But if they meet you, basically they'll know everything that you've done the second that they see you. As them. Or if you suddenly shapeshift into a completely fake person, the curse will then create that person into reality. And the same with if you turn into like a random creature. But if you turn into a random creature, like I don't know, like a kaiju, a giant Mothra, there is then going to be an opposite sex creature that will appear somewhere in the world, and at some point it will try to mate with you because of the curse, because you are the only left of its species. So
You mean you did that, and then he's now gone on a quest to actually make this happen for real, because he was very into that idea.
he
I'm
was
just
into
gonna
that idea
say-
because he said this is a really funny character concept. But taking that and having it a little bit like more of the more Mystique or Beast Ball style power, turning into anything is kind of cool. But let's just dial it down. What would you consider a transmogrification ability, like a shape-shifting ability, that would actually be considered kind of meh, kind of crappy?
I think like a transmogrification. I mean, it will still be useful. I think still people would still do it, but it's like the ability to like slightly shift your features, like just slightly, like move your nose upwards a little bit,
So like
or
character
like maybe
slider stuff. You can't do anything else,
yeah.
but you can character slider yourself.
You're right. Your character slider abilities. So you make yourself a bit fatter or a bit thinner, and it's like actually it could be even better if you like with character sliders, like like on Monster Factory for the McElroys, where you just like you can make yourself really sort of nightmarish by like making the sliders really big or really small. And so you look like that. You don't gain any other powers. You look sort of like the features you already have are either just really big or really small, and maybe change color or something. But it's like, it is like being in a Bethesda game. You just like you can make yourself look as you are, or like really extreme versions of yourself. I would say that's like, it'd be funny, but you'd be fun at parties. But like that, I don't see that being a character.
After seeing the nightmarish creatures that my brother can create on just something as simple as Dark Souls character creator with the sliders on that, yeah, I mean, you could do some really weird stuff. It's like, oh, Alex, you've suddenly given yourself like a larger nose, a bigger chin, and completely changed your forehead shape, and now you are completely looking like a different person, and it's so much simpler. But at the same time, it would be so much easier to create like a nightmarish freak of nature that everyone's just like, oh, what's happened there? But it still would work for a great disguise. Kind of.
Yeah, if you did, actually, you could have like the whole cryptid thing where you just like enhance your features to ridiculous things so you look like an alien, and then you could just like mess with people, like saying like, "Don't be afraid," and pretend to be an alien and like get them to freak out and run away while you take all their belongings. That would be, and then you just transform back into normal, and it's like, oh, alien, wow, like no one would ever suspect that.
But that would still be quite a crappy transmogrification ability.
Yeah, I find a worse one.
Okay.
Manipulate the not the color, just the length of all the hair on your body.
That's
it. So all you can do is just make your hair like even just your body hair longer or shorter.
Can you grow body hair anywhere as well? Like, say for instance, like, you can make your beard longer or shorter, eyelashes longer or shorter.
It would actually be funny as well if it's only places where a lot of hair grows out, like your beard, your eyebrows, your ears, or your armpits, or other areas that are unpleasant.
Nose hair, streaks of it right down to the floor.
I think you could get away with it, because I mean, to be fair, if I suddenly could like make my beard ever longer and my hair ever longer, I could sort of look more cavish and almost like as if like I've been like on an expedition for like 100 years, and then suddenly like I shrink it down, I could then at least see what I look like bald. I don't know. I feel like the manipulation of your own hair, that kind of level of, I still would think that that's more like it's partially biological manipulation or self-biomass manipulation, but I also would consider it shapeshifting. This is why that they're so
like Bigfoot,
frickin' close. But
I mean, I'd say that's more that's more good, especially if you're a spy, because you'd be like, we're looking for an unshaven bald man. All you need to do is just like
give yourself a mohawk.
Yeah, just give yourself all kinds of hair, and it's amazing. You can look in exactly the same, but through the power of having different hairstyles, it looks totally different. You do look totally different. I mean, that's why criminals like shave after doing jobs where they've got a big beard, because people do find it difficult to recognize them.
I've got one then. So here's more. The ability to only shapeshift it into one specific creature. Like, you go for one specific. You can only turn into this one specific creature, and I'm going to say that it would be, let's say, the ability to only transform into one specific insect, and I'm going to say the one specific insect is a cockroach, because nobody really likes them. Like, fair enough, some people might be okay with them, some people might keep them as pets, but there is a general gist that people do not like cockroaches. And I think that would just be the worst thing. I'll turn into a cockroach and just scuttle around. If someone finds you or hears you, they're gonna stomp you to death. Like, at least with shit like manipulating your hair or changing the parts and bits and body pieces of your body, at least there's some level of like, I can disguise myself, I can do this. At least you still look human. At least you can still look semi-human, and people won't like try and kill you on sight. But like, if you're a cockroach, 90% of the time, people are going to be like, and try and kill you.
Yeah. Or like they say, oh, there's a pest problem here. So if you're hiding out on somewhere, it's like, what's that smell? Oh, it's pesticide. I'm just fumigating the entire house. Yeah, that is pretty great. I mean, especially if it's like, ironically, not even a cockroach. If it was a spider and you get like, you just shack up in Sam's house, you were getting inside that vacuum.
Yes.
The other thing that I'm going to talk about, which is part of this, hybridization, which ultimately makes this part of the power, like shapeshifting, inorganic or inorganic or organic, either of the two. Shapeshifting like this is so good if you can hybridize, like you have a hybrid mode. For instance, I said like the cockroach thing, you can turn perfectly into a cockroach. But then if you are half cockroach, half person, there might be some level of capabilities of special factors that you can do. I know that if you're half ant, half man, you'd have an enforced amount of strength, an exoskeleton, and pheromone sensing, which is way better than what we can do with our own capability of smelling. Turning half into a brick wall, half into a person, that could give you some capability of defense. Or even just turning into a wheelie bin that has legs, because nobody like that would be like the modern day equivalent of a mimic. Wouldn't it just like, anyway, I'm just gonna put the rubbish up as it just gets swallowed up by this teethy
Pizza.
massive yeah. Okay, yeah, fair enough. It, like Doctor Who, yeah, from the yeah. Pizza. If no one knows what I'm talking about, watch Rose, the first episode of that series of the reboot. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, it's like, yeah, you know what? I wouldn't mind doing that, actually. I would like to be a sort of... I'd be like a traitor test and be like, that would be the ultimate troll. Or like, if I was a murderer or something, that would be great. I'd be just sort of like by the road or whatever. It would be like, look inside for a surprise, and like, wandering dipshits will be just going, ooh, a surprise, and it's like just swallow them up with like some, just eating them.
I
That would be
definitely
like, yeah, that would
no
be a
no.
good way to live.
I
I
definitely
think.
I definitely think like the possibility of turning half into one thing, half into yourself, that would actually be quite good. I mean, as we already have said, you kind of get this. Well, you do get this with the Animite Tales games. As one of the powers, you actually can turn into like only one thing. But later on, you get the hybrid form, which then further enhances you because you're like a human-sized humanoid version of that creature, like half person, half wasp, half person, half dog, half person, half lion, half person, half I don't know, freaking rhino.
Spider.
Oh,
Or
spider.
dragon.
And it's kind of just interesting to see that possibility. Like, yes, he said dragon, but it's like, yeah, like throwing all those out of the window, like possible like mythical or fake creatures, and just going to the real ones. There's still a lot of stuff that you could do with it. Like hybrid creatures are so interesting. I don't know. To me, it's one of the reasons why I put them in there, because I just love that idea of, oh, an ant the size of a person could lift this much, and it's just so incredible.
Oh, you don't even know, but I mean, we've had quite a lot of how would I just, like in the kiln. Remember when I created Tawny Frogmouth, who was like this owl, and sort of this Australian owl human hybrid. And like, not only could I like, was I perfect hybrid because I had like claws and wings and the ability to rip things in half, with my beak. I also had this ability, which is like basically a kaiju form, where I would just could just grow in size as my massive, but so I'd become like a rock essentially, like the mythical creatures of rock, just these giant birds with talons. So I would even have that on top of that. Like I would create, I would mimic my form to be that of a half bird man, and then have this form of like a kaiju bird man, which is even more ridiculous power and opportunities.
It's kind of almost showing the anthropomorphic side of the powers themselves, that you actually become like half and half. Like, obviously, as Sam said in the trailer, powers like this can make you seem similar to that of fairies, because you can just become half something else. But also, like, it reminds me a lot of King Shark. I don't just love the idea of just a half shark, half man. And they are huge. Like, in almost every depiction, King Shark is huge. Like, a huge bulk. Like, bulked up being massive shark head and razor sharp teeth. And it's just terrifying how dangerous, like, that would actually really be. I don't know,
I mean,
Sam, do you
it's
have anything else to add to this? Like, hybrid transformation?
Yeah, well, probably one of the ones that we would use most in this game would be weapon physiology. Instead of becoming like a full in Soul Eater, and also in Prototype, instead of becoming a full weapon like just becoming like a sword, you can instead turn your hand into a sword and kill people that way.
Or you could
that
become
is also
Edward
true.
Scissorhands. Like,
That
those
is
Yes.
also true,
they would be
yes.
like
Prototype.
because it is like, yeah, I mean, there's weapon physiology, but you can turn yourself into things that aren't necessarily weapons, but can be weaponized, like scissors or like just big bulky things. Like you turn yourself into like a boulder, or you turn your
It's just
arms.
boulder
into,
hand.
yeah, you just
Edward
get big
Boulder
old
hands.
boulder hands. Yeah, Edward Boulder hands. Or
Yeah.
So it's funny that you bring up Prototype, because I guess it's now sort of time to talk about this. Is sort of like the self biomass manipulation form of shapeshifting, where the user can't necessarily turn into an object in the same way. Like, they don't turn into they don't turn into a person. They don't turn into like an actual iron sword, but instead they can manipulate their body to make it go into shapes and levels of density that would allow them to do so. For instance, in Prototype and in Spider-Man with the Venom symbiote, and also we see it a few times with characters that have elemental mimicry. Like, for instance, we see it with oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his isn't it Clayface? Sandman and Clayface. There we go. Where they are actually an element, and they shapeshift and they can do all this, but sometimes they are allowed some of these other previously stated ones, such as polymorphism and stuff like that. But these ones, they actually are able to manipulate their form. We're gonna, so they can sometimes gain those abilities, which doesn't always necessarily make sense. I'm a person who can manipulate my body, like rubber or elastic or putty or mud or clay or sand. Oh, I can also turn into anyone and also sound like anyone, which always seemed a bit strange to me. But
wasn't it that like Elastaman or something? The Elastic Man who could like one of his things was that he was kind of a con artist because he would mold his face because he had rubber physiology, and he could like mold his vocal cords. So like that was his way of getting around it. Like he didn't transform into things, but he just sort of molded his flesh around
yes,
in order to like do it, which is kind of the thing, which is it's sort of a clever idea, I suppose, because he's like, I guess it's sort of a version of like the slider ability. Like he wasn't actually transforming into anything, he was just like messing around with his own features that were already there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I still find it interesting because, as you said, Sam, like, you can make parts of your body into weapons. Sometimes it's as simple as making yourself like a fluid or a sticky mess, or actually just something as simple as your body is still the same level of density as human flesh and bone and sinew and skin and organs, but you can shape it so that then it's like, okay, I'll just make my fist bigger, or I'll suddenly make the structure of my entire body suddenly like smaller and dense and condense it so that I'm a smaller creature. There's so many different ways that like the malleable form of shapeshifting is. There's a lot more limitations to it in certain aspects. For instance, a lot of the time they can mimic the same density as steel, but they're not actually steel. Which most of the time doesn't really matter. But in certain situations, like, oh, I need to have a piece of metal to be shiny enough to be, like almost like a reflective surface or a mirror. I can't do that with my flesh alone. So it's just kind of interesting doing that sort of thing. So, sorry, go on.
I'll just say this is the time when I bring up Steven Universe yet again, because there is like yes, it's that time again. Like Joe has One Piece, Sam has Spider-Man, I have
I'm the
Steven
Shadow now.
Universe. So you're the Shadow. Yeah, Sam has had a bit of a character arc. He's gone from Spider-Man to the Shadow in terms of fandom.
I wonder why. Watch the villains campaign. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, it's like, yeah, like there is abilities of the gems, which are an alien race that are comprised of like hard like holograms. And there's one character, Amethyst, who like makes a point of shifting her form all the time, but there are a number of downsides to do this. First of all, she can't hold it forever. It is like, straining herself. So there is a time limit on her doing it. Second of all, she can only do purple because that's her gem color. Like she can only do constructs of light that are purple colored. And second of all, like usually when she goes into inanimate objects, there's still like a face. So she can't get rid of her face. So like when she transforms into the amethyst copter, which is just herself as a helicopter, like she's still got a face instead of like headlights and stuff and a mouth and everything. So there it is. There is my section of Steven Universe. Continue.
That's still quite interesting though. I mean, like that is actually the perfect. I guess that's the perfect explainer, to be fair, because I'm saying about like, for instance, like if a human or a normal living creature was to do it, they're made up of blood, organs, and so on and so forth. You're actually talking about creatures that are made of like hard light and some kind of like energy, and that is their living biological form. That's their form of biology. And then you go over to stuff like the symbiote from Spider-Man, either Carnage or Silver Riot, or obviously, I guess you could say this really unknown one called Venom. But basically,
I mean, Carnage is the one that tends to do that more than Venom, to be honest.
Yes.
I don't know why, but Carnage, more than the others, tends to be the one that like elongate his hands into blades and weapons and axes.
It's mostly because he wants to, and obviously, like Venom is after a certain point, Venom is more trying to copy Spider-Man, so it's like more punches, kicks, and being sort of a monster version of him rather than just because obviously like Carnage was affected by the weirdness of the mind of what's his name?
It's Cassidy.
There you go. And so
Spider-Man fan.
And so it is that thing of like but their physiologies are completely different to us. They're like living goop, like they're like living sort of just sludge or living slime.
I have a semi explanation for why he's able to do that and does it more than Venom does, though. Because there's this implication that the symbiote needs to like have perfect, symbiosis with the host and stuff, and like basically going with Cleus Cassidy, like the symbiote was like, oh yeah, we are the same. We are one person. Like they in some iterations they don't even refer to themselves as we; they refer to themselves as I, because they are like perfectly formed together. So that might be why it is. It's like there's no friction at all. It's like they have more control over their symbiote powers. That's.
I mean, I would agree with that, if not for the fact that other people have used the Carnage symbiote that have not been as attached to that have also used powers like that.
But remember, if you think about it, he is the one who uses the Carnage symbiote at the point of its birth, and he is the main user of it. Similar to the main Venom symbiote, they all roughly mimic the Spider-Man thing. Web shooters barely uses the whole weapon thing because they're more about punching and kicking, because it's not only mimicking the fact that it came from Spider-Man, but when it's attached to the guy who isn't Spider-Man, he hates Spider-Man to the point of which he wants to be his antithesis, which is not saying that he can't do that, but it's more that like it's almost like a lack of Eddie Brock's imagination. That's my take on it. I don't know, Sam. You can correct me there, but
I mean, no, I'm not going to go into a big elongated rant.
Fair enough, but I think that is part of this ability. No, I was just going to say, I think that is part of this ability. Like, it is all about the creativity, because obviously, if you were creative enough, you could technically create a whole new physical form, or you could create a whole new type of styles and objects and weapons. Now, you guys have had a lot of different references, and I'm just going to throw my final reference before we get into our next main part of this component topic, which is going to be, of course, a JoJo's reference. There's
Take a drink.
Yep, there's a character in it which I'm pretty sure that they don't fully confirm, but they talk about it a bit, being that this guy is supposedly an alien, and he can shapeshift into a ton of different objects and items, and pretty much he can like turn into dice. He can turn into binoculars. He can turn into a knife. He can turn into all sorts of different objects and items. And he can partially shapeshift. He can fully shapeshift. And he, even weirder, he can shapeshift into multiple separate objects. Because at one point he turns into shoes. 2 separate shoes for this guy to wear so that then he can run away extra fast and cling to walls. At one point he turns himself into a set of 3 dice. And another point, he turns into a pair of binoculars, and so on and so forth. He turns into all sorts of weird stuff. Now, that ability is even strange and wacky and bizarre, considering that it's not actually one of the magical abilities in that series called a stand. So everyone still wonders like how he can do it, and the only explanation he ever gives anyone is, "Oh, it's because I'm an alien," and they still don't know if they completely believe that, and they just leave it at that. Like, they never really fully confirm if he is or isn't. But his abilities are based on his imagination and creation, but he does state that there's a limit to it. He can't turn into like something like a stick of dynamite or a working machine, because he can't mimic machinery, and he can't mimic something that has a chemical reaction in the forms of like blowing up or turning into liquids or anything like that. So he can turn into almost any kind of solid. He can also like shapeshift and turn into other objects and so on and so forth. But I don't think he ever turns into creatures. I might be wrong about this, but I can't fully remember. It's been at least a couple of years since I last saw part 4.
That's so weird. Actually, yeah, like multiple transforming into like splitting yourself. That is actually a power that you can get in the Animite Tales. So that's just like it's just so weird. I mean, it kind of like I was thinking of like the vampire lore thing where you turn yourself into like various different, like in a whole, plague of rats or
A
an
swarm of
entire
bats.
swarm of bats. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so you're like you taking off bits. You are separating yourself, even though and you form into one. That is like, I didn't really consider that as part of shifting, but yeah, it is, isn't it? You were
Yeah.
literally, yeah. I don't know. It's
Swarm
I guess you
transformation.
yeah.
Turn
I
into
guess
a fog.
yeah, or something like that. It's oh god, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's sort of
I
like
mean, I can understand, like, imagine that being just fog, water particles in the air.
that's so weird.
We talked
That's
about
so
this
weird.
in our episode that we did with Shane, where we talked about elemental mimicry, because it's exactly that. It's just the ability to turn one's form into one certain thing. It's relatively similar to that of shapeshifting, because it is turning oneself into an object. But the difference between shapeshifting and mimicry is really just down to the fact that your body is turning into the shape of, and becoming sort of like this. Elemental mimicry, or specifically mimicry, is when you actually become it, but you can turn back, or you still stay the same shape as yourself. It's just if someone hits you, it's almost like as if it's like a shimmer, and it's like someone scratches away the surface of it and they see fire underneath because that you've become fire, or literally you just engulf yourself in what you are, because it's similar to I don't know, like you look similar to the Human Torch, but obviously, as we said in the last time that we spoke about this, Johnny Storm's abilities are relatively close to elemental mimicry, because his body does mimic that of like fire, but his actual biology doesn't mimic it. His biology generates such a heat. So it's kind of that same thing of like with shapeshifting, because you can transform into all sorts of different things, but it doesn't always. There's always a limitation. Like some people could have like the ability of basically god tier shapeshifting. I think there's an ability called absolute shapeshifting or unhindered shapeshifting, and it's literally you can turn into anything. You could turn into planets, you could turn into galaxies, you could turn into other people, you could turn into anyone, anything. You can make up what you turn into.
I'm sorry, did you say galaxies?
Yes, there's an ability where someone literally just turns into a fake galaxy, so that then when someone looks up at the stars, they literally just see our galaxy, and then literally like they turn back into like just a single being, and
My
when they
mind
look
is
back
blown.
up, and it just sees nothing. It's more of like a god's power, because like it's why like some people say like, oh, some of the star alignments were based on some of the different gods, because it's like, oh, that's one of their
Yeah.
abilities. Their ability is either to mimic or to shapeshift into star
that is-
alignment.
You know what?
Can I
That
te-
makes me think of a lot of other lore possibilities for the Adamite Tales game. But go on, Sam. Sorry.
So can I tell you an actual one of the star things and where it came from? Just because I find it quite funny.
Go on.
It's one of the ones where this. Okay, you know what do you call the crab?
Oh, cancer.
Cancer.
Cancer. Should I tell you where that one came from in lore?
Go for it.
Okay, well, Hercules and his cousin / lover were fighting the Hydra, and Hera just sent down to help the Hydra out. Hera just sent down a crab to try and stop Hercules, and Hercules with one, I think either it was a punch or a kick, just killed it instantly. And Hera thought, you know what? For your sacrifice, you're being turned to stars. And he's just like, that's where we get cancer.
Well,
The
I
star
mean,
chart
there
jet.
you go. I mean, there's nothing else. Wow, jeez. Okay.
And speaking of one of the great film Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, has the goddess Eris doing a lot of that in the movie.
I was actually going to say the last thing, and Sam, you perfectly brought this back to it. The last thing is actually something that I didn't tell either of you about, so here we go, is the third type of shapeshifting, technically the fourth if you counted the other two, which is instead of turning oneself, you turn others or other things into other things. This power is called shape-shifting manipulation. Rather than manipulating shape-shifting or manipulation shapeshift, this is shapeshift manipulation, as you can imbue an object to be shapeshifted or make a living creature shapeshift. There are two specific types of this ability, as we see with magic, as you literally just said there, turning a crab into a star alignment, or, the classic one of, oh, watch out, or this witch will turn you into frogs. We see this one other time, which is, sorry again, JoJo's, where a guy has this power called Golden Wind, or Gold Experience. Anytime that he hits a physical object, he can turn an object into a living creature. And there's a moment where he punches a guy's tooth out, and the tooth becomes a fly. And this guy tries to hide, and the fly comes back to him. So that's how this guy figures out where he is, because it's like, oh, I made it seek out where it came from, and since it came from you, the fly will always follow you. And it's such a really cool ability, the ability to turn one object into another, transmogrification. Now, we might talk about this in another episode, properly and fully, but I just thought I'd like to just classify it, because we've already classified a couple of other previous episodes in this one, which is, I just love the idea of, I imbue the powers of shapeshifting onto you, forcing you into this other shape.
You know what?
Got two great examples.
I mean,
right
yeah,
now.
I would honestly, actually, yeah, okay, go on, Sam. What's the two great examples? Go on.
Well, of course, the story of Arane, or Iraq, I think it's Arane, where we, in Greek mythology,
I think
the
might
first
be
person,
Arachne.
I think it's Arachne, who, more or less, a seamstress that pissed off Athena, challenged her to a tapestry fight, as you do, and made her really angry, and then tried to commit suicide, hanging herself, and instead got turned into a spider so she could hang herself forever. And one from the Teen Titans cartoon, one of the episodes with is it Mumbo Jumbo?
I think so. I think it's Mumbo Jumbo.
The wizard, whatever he's called.
Yes, yeah.
Quite funny wizard. Yeah. He turns all of them into animals, except for Beast Boy, who he can't. He turns them into inanimate objects. He turns them every time he tries, he just reverts back. And then he turns them into a lamp, and then Beast Boy throughout the episode just keeps changing into various inanimate objects. I found it quite funny. But he turns everyone, like, he turns Raven into, like, a rabbit, and the others into, I can't remember what animals. But they're not, like
I
that.
wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised as to half of them that they turn them into, but at the same time, I couldn't guess off the top of my head. It's one of those things that, like, the Raven the rabbit. Oh, actually, no, that doesn't actually surprise me. That I say out loud, but never.
I think it was because he pulled her out of a hat. I think that was the joke.
Okay. It's all themed.
After that, I'm just thinking, like, in terms of, like, the game, I would love to create a character like that, where, like, my special, like, ability, my unique attribute is that, if inanimate objects shapeshifting is like, I can only do it, but I don't do it on myself. I do it with other things, and, like, literally, I could create super weapons at that point. Like, I could be like, okay, here is this, here is this paperclip. Here is, like, a bunch of paperclips. Oh, look, it's a bazooka. It's like, there would be limitations, of course, but you are essentially a god at that point. Like, anything that you touch inanimately could be turned into something, to help you.
Something that's always entirely crazy to me is just the power of turning one object into another, or turning a human into a different object. That power, because unless if you're a character like Beast Boy, a lot of the time turning something into another thing, that's permanent, unless if the wielder of said power states otherwise. Like, maybe in games you'd have to have it where it's like, unless if this really particular difficult requirement is met, you can't make it permanent, sort of thing. Like, almost like it can only be permanent once on a person. If it's ever undone, that's it. You can never do this again on them. They're immune to the permanence of the after effect, meaning that, like, it will only ever be like a short period of time before they transform back into their original form. But yeah, like, as a game design idea, like, that's that they do that a lot with tons of games where it's like, oh, you're now turned into etc. as a joke, like, oh, you're turned into tofu and you have to jump around and as tofu for about like 20 seconds, or oh, you're turned into a gobstopper or a ball of candy or whatever, and you have to float around and hope that you don't get hurt during that time, and so on and so forth. There's all these sort of interesting different abilities that they have in games where they try and, like, do that, but it's like, man, imagine if someone could just, like, hit you once with this ability, you're now permanently that character or that player or that forever that fight. You can only fight in a specific way because you are now made into the thing that they shapeshifted you into.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the Wabbajack, Joel.
Oh, yeah.
I was definitely not gonna say anything about that because I forgot.
I knew. Also, the mask. You can just change random items into different items.
Well, yes, but that's the sake of comedy. Also, his power is basically continuity manipulation.
Exactly. Where he turns a set of balloons into a Tommy gun.
Yes.
If he makes it look like a Tommy gun. Because he can.
Because he finds it funny, he finds it hilarious, or at least he hopes that we find it hilarious, and therefore, because of that, he has power.
We do.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess that's really it, to be fair. Unless if you have anything else to say before we get into the last segment.
No, I think the last segment is like, us. What would our transformation abilities be? I think would be the last bit. But and I've got ideas for that. I don't really
not with
have
the
more
new
examples.
improv format.
Okay, well,
Hey, do have one last one. Because I'd feel bad if I didn't mention this. Just another Greek god reference. Their ability to become inanimate objects, but also do biological things while inanimate objects.
Is this
Example being
Zeus?
Zeus.
Yeah, there you go.
The conception of Perseus. I think it's Perseus. When Zeus is gold dust.
Zeus.
When Zeus is gold dust, he just gets into this, like, it's because, like, Perseus's mother is in, like, a tower with, like, I don't know why, but this, for some reason, he had to become gold dust to get in. And then that's how he has her as gold dust.
Of course.
Yeah.
So moving
I just had to bring that up.
swiftly onwards, into the final segment, as in, what would you have? Or I can't ever remember this segment. I need a jingle, damn it.
What do we want? What do we want?
What would we want? So obviously, the main part of this is usually just, here we go. What would you have? Basically, it's the same equivalent of, if you could have a superpower, any superpower, what would it be? Except from, it's, if you could have the title of the video, what the title of the video would you have and why? What personalized version? But because that shapeshifting is literally so open and vague, I didn't really necessarily think that this one would be an interesting enough question. I mean, I think the only thing that I could ask is a yes or no question. If you could have the choice between any and all of these different powers, or like any power in existence other than basically being God or God tier level powers, or being a god or whatever. If you could have pretty much any power in all of existence, would you take any of the ones that we've described today over the ones that you normally would say to after what we've?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because
what would you take?
Well, I would take. Well, obviously, I'll do the stereotypical trans answer. I would have like body transformation so that I could get all of the surgery and hormones that I wanted without having to spend any money or being on any waiting lists.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Happy Pride Month, everybody!
Hey, and what about you, Sam? Would you take this over, I don't know, whatever you would like?
I mean, I wouldn't mind. I'd like to make myself look like I want to make myself look.
I mean, I think we all would, to be fair. Although this is the problem. On one hand, I'm like, there are parts about me that I wouldn't mind changing. On the other hand, I'm like, but I really want to be a freaking chair. No, I feel like that would have been just a great way to come all the way back around from the first joke that we were talking about. I don't know.
You actually do want to be a chair.
No,
but you do actually want to be a chair, though.
As I said, I still want to be the nerd blade, nerd caliber. No,
honestly, go back to weapon physiology and see and find it, folks, because I love that episode because I think that is like the perfect weapon. I would love that to be an actual weapon in something, just the nerd blade.
I'd have to say though, if I got the choice
catch
between
up on my animes.
If I got the choice between any of the powers that we've said today and any of the powers that we've previously said, like let's say any of the episodes that we've done up till now, I'd say no. If someone was saying like you could have any of the powers that you've previously spoken about on the game, in the sessions or in the podcast, and any of these powers, would you choose them? I'd say no, because I know what power that I wouldn't mind having in real life. And obviously, as I said before, either speedster or just the healing factor is just such a useful ability. I don't know. I don't know. But hey, that's the whole concept of this, I guess. Plus, I wanted to be the only one who was actually the devil's advocate because no one said no, so fair enough.
I mean, that is your role. It's to say no when we say yes in these things. You need a bit of balance.
But thank you for joining us. This one went a little differently. If you guys liked the improv style, because instead of actually just like going off with a schedule,
we have schedules.
Relatively, I usually have it written down on notes, but this time I thought, you know what, we'll just fly by the seat of our pants and actually just talk about the things that interest us. Like,
honestly, it's no different from how I usually do this podcast.
Yeah, fair enough.
I've not noticed any change.
Well, for me, the only change is that I haven't like been timing it, and I haven't been looking at notes, going like, okay, so we need to talk about this, because this is such a massively wide range power that like I just felt like us talking about it was just getting all of our thoughts out and ideas out of it. I'd say the last question really was, if you had the ability of shapeshifting, you've already said what you'd want it for. Do you think that you'd use it for any particular situations in your life other than the obvious of like changing appearance to make you the best you? Would you do it in any other situation, like either evil, good, or just personal or selfish reasons, like either because it's like you want to be someone else, or even that you just like, I don't know what I'd do without people knowing who I am not, like, you know, and the anonymity of it, you know, would you do that, and what exactly would you do it with?
Oh yeah, I would. So much.
Like,
So
When sneak into movies that are like above your age range.
I mean, I'm 22. There is no above my age range.
and yeah,
No,
and you're the
do you know what I
youngest
do?
out of us, so
Just make myself look like an old person, so I get really cheap tickets on a bus, or
That is-
really young, so I can get into cheap seats.
Ah, damn it, that is a really good idea.
Myself look more or less handsome to get with people because I'm so alone right now. So very alone.
Aw.
Okay, so I would probably, if I could change my appearance into anything or anyone, I think I would try to use it for the sake of, say for instance you want to get a job, right? You could get multiple forms of ID as a different person and keep going to this particular job. Like, for instance, I could shapeshift into, like, say for instance I could be me and I apply for a job, then I could shapeshift into someone else and then try and apply for the same job and do it again and again and again in different forms and see whether I'd get it based on the same answers but just because of the way that I look. And that would be a sort of an interesting way of going about it. On the other hand, I probably would use it more in the form of, as Sam said, like, I don't know, I'll make myself older or younger to get on the bus. I will, however, say this, as someone who's not really all that interested in sort of living younger days, nor wanting to skip to the end. I'd only use it for cheap tricks. I wouldn't really use it to, like, I don't think. As someone who's in a relationship, I don't think I would try and do it to score dates. But at the same time, I think everyone is that level of self-consciousness where they want to, if they needed to.
It's just I'm not looking for one night stands. I'm looking for like an actual, but you know, make myself look much to get with someone long term.
They only like redheads, so you're just permanently a redhead. Say, I'm sorry, it was a lie. I'm actually
exactly.
But I don't know, like, Alex, what about you? Do you think that there's any?
I got one. Well, you see, this is what I've always wanted to do. Like, you know, basically, I've always, you know, I'm very tiny usually and quite chubby. And, you know, I was always last to be picked for gym. If I was to have, like, you know, to be able to, you know, mold my appearance, the things I would do is like, if anyone see anybody getting bullied or hassled, or if someone tried to attack me or something, I could just transform into a giant, jacked motherfucker. And I'd be like, what? And then they would not know what to do. You know, that would be my ultimate sort of power fantasy. Like, it'd be like, I would be like, I can mold myself into be the ultimate intimidating force. I wouldn't actually be because I'd still have the fighting capabilities of a kitten, but I would be
It's
able
the
to.
charisma power, really.
Yeah, I would just be able to like look like I could beat someone up, and usually that's enough to get rid of bullies. You know, like I can't do it. If I turn up and say like, "Hey, stop bullying," they're just gonna like laugh at me and push me over. But if I could actually mold my body to be this jacked giant kaiju person, then you know it would actually be, you know, it would be a lot easier to do that. And that's what I would do. I would stick up for the little people. Is what
And
I've been, and I would protect
when
myself.
it comes to superpowers, isn't it always about that? With great power comes great power.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Thank you both Sam and both Alex, both of you. My outros are getting worse, just like the intros. If you guys enjoyed, if you guys at home enjoyed this, then please definitely subscribe to Animite Tales and keep an eye out for all of our different posts, because we do ones on the Animite Tales tabletop RPG. So you can actually check that out and see what we do. The most recent episode just dropped. Yes, it did, and things happen, and we're not going to say what, but all I'm going to say is, sorry, Sam. Yeah, so if you guys like that, definitely subscribe, like, and don't forget to check out our Patreon, because this would not be going as smoothly as it has been over the last year without all of the amazing support that we have, and not trying to be greedy, but it would be nice for some more. So,
Give us
come
some
on.
more. We'll give you some more tasty content and tasty takes.
Oh
Go
yeah,
on.
and even more art,
Mm,
some beautiful
stop
art that you get to design for the game, as you'll tell us what you'd want, and we'll get it done in the art and design similar to the one that you're currently seeing right now. But you'll also get to see ones like this, as I will put it on now. Ta-da! Look at those pictures, aren't they glamorous?
Oh, look at them.
All of these beautiful arts. We've got Toxie, we've got Shadow Boy, the Veil right in the back, and we've got some other beautiful characters. So if you want to check out that, then definitely check out our Patreon. And if you want to become one of the tiers, then you'll be able to get one of those pieces of art designed not only for yourself by our beloved coin, but you'll also be able to have that piece of art then put into the game, and we will see exactly how we can balance it for the game, so that then it will be there for all of the people to either use or be suffering against as they have to use or fight against it. But again, thank you very much. This has been very long-winded, so I'm just going to do this again. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for Sam and Alex for joining us, and all I'm going to say to you guys is thank you very much. Subscribe, like, I have Twitter, Animite Tales, and of course, don't forget, next episode will be at some point, and probably not going to be pervy powers. Probably.
Or who knows what the next episode shall be.
I sure don't.
Knows.
The
shadow knows.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you in the future.
Ciao, ciao for now.